Rockets and Knicks were in Game 5 when O.J. started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the juice was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Good evening, Alaskans. Welcome to Oversight Live. I'm Ben Carpenter, your host for the evening. Thanks for joining us. If you're watching the recording, thanks for watching the recording. What is Oversight Live? Well, I start every show explaining what my thinking was. Why do you spend so much time doing this? A number of years ago, while I was serving in the legislature, I had a conversation with a number of people who said, hey, wouldn't it be nice if there was somebody that would help people understand what's happening down in Juneau? Well, I'm not in the legislature anymore, and it's fallen on me to share my experience and help you understand what's happening. So, Oversight Live is your road to Juneau until we can get one built. We know it's cost prohibitive, both in time and money, to get down to Juneau and provide oversight, influence, and see for yourself what's happening. But it is not a valid excuse for not understanding what's happening, because most of the public meetings, at least, are broadcast. So you can watch them yourself. You can go to ktoo.org and watch them yourself. Or you can participate with me, and I'll prioritize what I think is important. And I'll provide you a forum to ask questions and network with other people as we learn more about what's happening with government. So if you're watching live and you got a question of what we're watching, or if you want to see something, ask me to bring something forward. If you got a question, just chat with it in your window. We're broadcasting on YouTube Live and or YouTube, Facebook, and X. And if you just bump the question in your chat window there, I'm going to get it. If you're watching the recording, shoot me an email at producer@oversightlive.com. I'll get that. I'll respond to your email. Do the best I can to answer the questions. If it's a good question, or if it's just pertinent to things, don't be surprised if I use it on air like this, because if you got the question, it means somebody else got the question. And the whole point here is to edify Alaskans and make us better citizens and be able to provide better oversight of our government. So that's the point. All right. So what do we watch? Tonight, we're going to continue on. We're going to have a conversation about equity. No, not that equity. We're talking about equity participation. We're talking about ownership. What does it mean to be owner of this project as the state, as AGDC, as the state's corporation, 25% owner? What does that mean? What is it? What's the benefits to us? What is the cost? What's the risk? I've been wanting to have this conversation for quite a while now. I've been asking the question, what does it mean to be 25% owner? And they're going to get down into the weeds tonight. And we're going to do our best to follow along and understand what's happening. But this is an important conversation. The legislature, if I understand correctly, doesn't have to make an equity decision right now. They need to make a tax decision right now. So we're talking about something that is educating the legislature on next steps after this, assuming that we can find a solution to this tax problem. Or if we can find a solution to the bill, if we can pass the bill with an adjustment to the state property tax that makes this project economical, then we can have a conversation about equity participation. All right. Good evening, all. Glad to see you're on already. So we're going to get started. Could be a long night. I was on Dukes this morning and I filled in for Bob Bird on KSRM for a couple hours this afternoon. So I kind of feel like I'm talked out, but we're going to give it our best shot tonight. All right, let's move to the other screen here with this up here. And we're going to jump into, this is a meeting from this afternoon. Just checking here from this afternoon, so it's fresh. So the second part of the Senate Finance meeting from today. There was a first half of the meeting, and this is the second half. Frank is asking me, are you Ben? I am Ben. And am I going to address access issues? Be more specific, please. What do you mean by access issues? Access in the context of equity participation, access to the project, or access to the pipeline? As in what Fairbanks is getting. We assume they're going to get a spur line. Are you talking about spur line access, or are you talking equity access? I don't know. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Let me know. Chris says, I hope the project takes place. Yeah, I do too. They're going to change things for Nikiski. Our life is going to change significantly. But everybody that's got access to the road system and to natural gas, your lives could change too if we get this export facility and we end up having lower cost gas. I mean, it's the only path forward to lower cost gas. So I did see that President Trump made some announcements regarding coal plants money being forwarded or earmarked or designated to building coal plants throughout the United States, and one of those is supposed to be built here in Alaska, and I think that's a good thing. I think the fear of coal being dusty, dirty, polluting facilities is a thing of the past. We've figured out how to clean up our coal production, or our coal power production. And frankly, if we don't do it, we're going to get beat in the energy arena by China, who doesn't have our sensibilities with regard to pollution. So it's a good thing. It is a good thing. If we overproduce electricity, that's a good thing. Means that there's plenty of opportunity for growth and economic growth. Okay, let's get started.
On the equity option position, I'm going to ask Mr. Kissinger to present.
Matt Kissinger for the record. We've talked about this quite a bit. AGDC has reserved the right to additionally invest directly into each of the sub-projects at 5 to 25% of each equity raise that there is within those sub-projects. Like we said, this is a contractual option, not an obligation. There's no catch to it. It is simply whether the state wishes to invest between 5 and 25%, and any of that 25% not taken by appropriation through the legislature will then also be offered to individual Alaskans, Alaskan companies, et cetera. And we're working on a program that does that as well.
Mr. Chairman, Frank Richards for the record. I would say that, again, what's important is that the equity participation is an option, but it will be on the same terms as other equity investors. So no premium, no disadvantage being provided to AGDC for coming in under these preemptive rights.
Misunderstood. Yeah, just as mentioned earlier this morning, I think there's a risk difference between the phase 1 and phase 2. So I would just, again, remind AGDC that there's a significant risk exposure to this project. And it's the, looks like the highest and hardest hurdle of the three entities, the liquefaction plant, the conditioning plant, and the pipe being the most critical to move the project forward, and also looks like it has the most risk in it. And I just think that you should take that into consideration when you consider making recommendations, because we don't necessarily have to invest in all three or any three. And we're a state, we're not an investment company, and we won't be the one blocking the construction of the project by us not being an equity investor.
Through the chair, Senator Stedman, you're correct that, again, the information that we will be providing back to the state of Alaska on the investment option will include the risk profiles for the individual subprojects, in this particular case, the pipeline project. And so it'll be an identification of the risk and reward for those investors. It will be contingent on, we will share the information, again, with the legislature and with other Alaskans who have the desire to invest, but it will be after already the considerations have been made by other major institutional large-scale investors who've made, again, a determination to invest. So that hopefully will provide some level of detail and as well as insight then to Alaskan investors on whether or not it is prudent and it meets the risk profile that they are willing to invest in.
Senator Stedman. Just as a reminder, I think, Mr. Chairman, several years ago, we hired a consultant to take a look at what hurdles would have to be dealt with to issue securities and the definition of securities to the people of the state. So that work was done by LBNA, and that was under the previous leadership of AGDC. So that is available for review and updating, much like we did Pegasus here a couple of days ago. So there is some complications and issues that we'll need to be aware of when that time comes.
Thank you, Senator Stedman. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, again, to Senator Stedman's identification of previous work, that would be really helpful for us to be able to see, again, around what your consultants provided to you in regards to the investment and the filings necessary to do that.
Wait, is that information the legislature is keeping secret from AGDC? No, I'm sure it's just a general oversight.
DC will be preparing and putting forward, again, a prospectus then that has to consider then what are the limitations or the making sure that we are meeting all the regulatory requirements for prudent investors.
Senator Stedman.
Yes, we can make sure that's available. I think it should be easy to attain, because there was a concern under the previous leadership at AGDC several years ago that there would have been numerous breaches of federal laws and would have created a lot of complications and, frankly, jail time. It was pretty
For a project that didn't get built?
Discussion. But we can make sure that they have that.
Thank you, Senator Stedman. Please proceed.
Yep. This is Matt Kissinger for the record. So again, just to describe these are preemptive rights. They're retroactive rights that get exercised once we achieve FID. So all the other investors come to the table, think the global infrastructure funds, retirement funds, pension funds, et cetera. They come to the table, they fill out the whole book of how much equity needs to be raised. And then they have to wait. They have to wait up to 6 months while we make a decision of whether we're going to back in and push them out of 25% of their investment, which is it's a real disadvantage to those investors. They have to tie up that capital with a slight bit of uncertainty. And this is why the 6 months, because people have asked us, why not longer than 6 months? This is really one of those reasons. And again, this goes back to Senator Keel's question earlier, why the limit of 5%? Because this is a meaningful transaction to push people out of their committed investment. And so the desire was to have it be at least a meaningful amount. And 5% was what was negotiated.
Senator Rick.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again. To address Senator Stedman's question about interface with other state corporations and the opportunities, that is one of the rights that we have retained in that option that, again, we'll present it to the legislature, but the opportunities then will be available for other state corporations should they have the capital, and this meets their.
Stedman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a couple of us have asked the chairman to review that language to ensure that there is review from the legislature on those activities. If that was to take place. And I've mentioned before, we got the railroad, we've got Alaska Industrial Development Authority, and we have the permanent fund, all with either substantial amount of bonding authority and or billions in cash, hundreds of millions, if not in billions, in liquid assets. So there is a concern there. So we've asked for that review. But I got one other just quick question, Mr. Chairman, just to back up. Excuse me, the earlier comment made by Mr. Richards, I think I'd like him to restate it and clarify it so we all understand. And that's the earlier language in the controlling language of AGDC dealing with property tax during construction. I think it was stated that was in the language. We gave up that right for issuing property tax during the construction of the gas line and on the facilities, I guess. Is that correct? Or I just want to make sure that we.
Senator Stedman, statute title, but it was that if a project, a gas line or a project that AGDC either owned or was a participant in, that the oil and gas property taxes under 4356 would be deferred during construction, or
Right.
not, would not be required to pay during construction.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, we can maybe get that dug out so everybody's kind of refreshed on the history of that and the language when we talk about the policy that we're going to put on the table. So we don't do redundancy or there's no misunderstanding.
There's no misunderstanding. I think the tax holiday should be monetized so we know what we gave up already. So just for the committee's information. Please proceed.
All right, Matt Kissinger for the record. In these next two slides, I'm just going to walk through sort of step by step how this dilution effect and the raising of capital works. First, I'd like to talk about the carry, because we talk about AGDC's carry. If you refer to an earlier slide in the 2023 President's Report that Frank gave to the AGDC board, we set out the goal of this transfer to a developer. And in that, we wanted to be carried through to FID. And we've achieved that. That's a non-dilutable, non-changing thing. We do not have to pay any development costs through to FID at this point in time. After FID, 8-Star Alaska, who owns all of 8-Star Pipeline LLC right now, will have divested of probably a very large portion of 8-Star Pipeline, but they will retain some of that. That retained equity will have distributions when there is cash flow into 8-Star Pipeline. So cash will flow into 8-Star Pipeline during operations, and 8-Star Pipeline will distribute to its owners, which will include other investors that come in, potentially us through our equity option. But it will also flow up to 8-Star Alaska through any retained interest. And AGDC will always get 25% of anything that goes into 8-Star Alaska. Just getting back to this slide, to start out with, you issue your debt because this is project financed. Equity comes after the debt. In this example, we've said 70% gets funded by debt. So for a $15.5 billion, and that number, by the way, is just a placeholder in this as these numbers have moved through the week. $15.5 billion pipeline, 70% funded by debt, really simplifying this and ignoring things like interest during construction, et cetera. That's 10.85 funded by debt. You need equity of 4.65. And so 8-Star Alaska will then go out to the equity market to raise that 4.65. And what they will have to exchange for that is equity in 8-Star Pipeline. It's been questioned, why would anyone just not say, I want 100% if I'm going to bring in all the capital? But you have to understand, 8-Star Alaska is bringing the permits, the right-of-way, the engineering, the contracts for the gas, the contracts for the downstream sales of that gas, which then leads to all the creditworthiness of the project, the financing of the project, the debt that we just talked about, and all the construction contracts. So that's what they would be bringing to the table. And this is a very normal course of action between developers and investors as you transition from pre-FID, final investment decision, and then through a final investment decision. I don't want to shy away from the fact that we could be fully diluted even. It's possible. And this was always what we considered the sort of icing on the cake. We do not include any of these developer economics in the Department of Revenue analysis. We don't include it in any of our own. But it is there, and it is the reward that Glenfarne gets from the project. So Glenfarne enjoys 75% of that carried developer economics. And this means we're 100% aligned with Glenfarne going through this process. Glenfarne's going to fight like mad to ensure the least amount of dilution of 8-Star Alaska's ownership in 8-Star Pipeline as you go through that process. And then we just benefit by taking 25% of what they retain. Let's see.
Question on this slide?
Yeah, on this slide, sorry, we've used 65% and 35% as the example. So in this example, 8-Star Alaska retains 35% and 65% of 8-Star Pipeline is issued to these other investors. Once that happens, we have our 6 months to then back into that 65%. And we can go to the next slide.
before you proceed to that, we have a question from Senator Stedman.
Yeah, just a question to help me for clarity on the financing. There was interest through construction. So on this project, would there be construction loans?
distributions when there is cash flow into 8-Star Pipe.
All right, folks. Okay. I think I'm up and running. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody? Sound good. All right. Can you hear the audio playing?
Pipeline. So cash will flow into 8-Star Pipeline during operations.
Presentation good. Okay. It looks like we are back in business. I am the CEO. I am the tech support. I am the janitor. Okay. Let's pick up where we left off here. Thanks all for being patient. We're going to continue here, and I think we're about somewhere where where my computer died. Chinese took over or something. I don't know what happened. Yeah, so let's talk about this whole equity thing. I was trying to explain. I don't know whether it. Oh my goodness, that's tight. I don't know whether you heard anything that I was talking about. Let me make this bigger. There we go. All right. Before we move off of this slide, I'm going to attempt to re-explain what I think is happening here. And I am not exactly sure, to be clear. I would be asking questions here because this is kind of outside my wheelhouse. All right. The bottom bullet. The bottom bullet. AGDCs reserve the right to participate in 5% to 25% of capital raise. That's your equity. Okay. So that means AGDC is going to have to come up with $230 million or as much as $1.26 billion. Okay. And that is to invest in 8-Star Pipeline, 8-Star Alaska, 8-Star Pipeline. That's where the arrows are pointing here for debt and equity. So you can come at this project with a certain amount of debt, but you have to raise a certain amount of equity, which is the cash, right? That's the cash, your own money. Investors want to see that you've got your own money in with the dog in the fight. That way, it's not just their money you're playing with. So the second bullet is saying that 8-Star Alaska, which is co-owned by AGDC and Glenfarne, sells a certain amount of equity ownership in 8-Star Alaska, or I'm sorry, 8-Star Pipeline. Okay, so that's where we have to buy in. If you don't buy in to the pipeline, then you don't have equity ownership there. So this makes sense to me now. Okay, so when we're talking about equity ownership, we're talking about equity ownership in 8-Star Pipeline. We're not talking about equity ownership in AGDC, the 25% owner, because what they said here, if it was broadcasting, you heard it, is that any of the revenue, the profit, the money that 8-Star Alaska generates and makes and keeps, okay, that money gets split between AGDC 25% and Glenfarne 75%. Okay, but that has nothing to do. That's with a project that's working, that it's built and functioning, and gas is flowing, and sales agreements are met, and everything's working fine, right? To get to that point, you got to have this raise the debt and the equity in order to get the thing built, okay? And that is what they're talking about with regard to ownership, okay? It also means that the owners of 8-Star Pipeline, I believe, your equity owners, if there is a cost overrun in the creation of the pipeline and the building of the pipeline, these owners are the ones that are going to be on the hook. It's either going to be debt or it's equity or a combination of the two in order to pay for that cost overrun to finish the pipeline. Okay. So that's the risk that comes with being the debt owner, or not debt owner, equity owner. Okay, so I think that's where we're at, and I will stand corrected if somebody with more experience here can explain it in a better way at some point in time. So just so happens I've got the only mic and camera tonight, and you're stuck with my knowledge here. But I will stand corrected. So that is what the equity means, not in the top portion of this, the 75-25. It is in the 8-star pipeline is what they're raising the money for. So let's continue on.
An 8-star pipeline will distribute to its owners, which will include other investors that come in, potentially us through our equity option. But it will also flow up to 8-star Alaska through any retained interest. And AGDC will always get 25% of anything that goes into 8-star Alaska.
Okay. All right. So retained interest is the money that would flow from 8-star pipeline into 8-star Alaska. And that's what would split between Glenfarne and AGDC 25-75. Other money that's made on the pipeline is going to be split between all of the equity investors. So there's going to be a number of firms, entities that are going to put in debt and equity to the project. That's what eventually that's what's going to happen. Okay. My friend Richard says, I am spot on. Okay. Well, as long as Richard thinks I'm spot on, then I'm spot on. Thank you, Richard, for that vote of confidence. Okay. This is all repeat, Frank says. Hey, come on, cut me some slack. I just had my computer die and I waved my magic wand and it's all back in operational now. And we didn't even lose a beat. Like we're on the same broadcast and everything. I think I did pretty good tech support here. All right, let's get to the next slide.
Just getting back to this slide, to start out with, you issue your debt because this is project financed. Equity comes after the debt. In this example, we've said 70% gets funded by debt. So for a $15.5 billion, and that number, by the way, is just a placeholder in this as these numbers have moved through the week. $15.5 billion pipeline, 70% funded by debt, really simplifying this and ignoring things like interest during construction, et cetera. That's 10.85 funded by debt. You need equity of 4.65. And so 8-star Alaska will then go out to the equity market to raise that 4.65. And what they will have to exchange for that is equity in 8-star pipeline. It's been questioned, why would anyone just not say I want 100% if I'm going to bring in all the capital? But you have to understand 8-star Alaska is bringing the permits, the right-of-way, the engineering, the contracts for the gas, the contracts for the downstream sales of that gas, which then leads to all the creditworthiness of the project, the financing of the project, the debt that we just talked about, and all the construction contracts. So that's what they would be bringing to the table. And this is a very normal course of action between developers and investors as you transition from pre-FID, final investment decision, and then through a final investment decision. I don't want to shy away from the fact that we could be fully diluted even. It's possible. And this was always what we considered the sort of icing on the cake. We do not include any of these developer economics in the Department of Revenue analysis. We don't include it in any of our own. But it is there, and it is the reward that Glenfarne gets from the project. So Glenfarne enjoys 75% of that carried developer economics. And this means we're 100% aligned with Glenfarne going through this process. Glenfarne's going to fight like mad to ensure the least amount of dilution of 8-star Alaska's ownership in 8-star pipeline as you go through that process. And then we just benefit by taking 25% of what they retain.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, let's just pose a question here. How many different ways does the state of Alaska budget need to benefit from this pipeline? Okay. For example, if what I'm understanding is correct and AGDC maintains 25% ownership and any of your retained economics moves 25% to AGDC, then AGDC is the state. It is the legislature. That money is appropriatable by the legislature. Okay. So that is a dividend paid to the legislature from AGDC because there's money there that's being generated. Okay. That's revenue to the state government. So we're going to tax, which raises the price of gas for consumers in order for the state to make some money. And then the state is going to maintain its ownership of 25% and it's going to make some money that way. So I guess I need to see the numbers. I need to see what the scale is here. I don't know what it is, what number it proposes to be, the 25% ownership. What does that retained economics mean for Alaska? What benefit? What dollar figure is it? Okay. How does it compare to the dollar figure that you would generate from taxes from a volumetric tax? I would hesitate to say that your volumetric tax is probably going to be more than this number here, but I'm just guessing there.
Let's see.
Question on this slide?
Yeah, on this slide, sorry, we've used 65% and 35% as the example. So in this example, 8-Star Alaska retains 35% and 65% of 8-Star Pipeline is issued to these other investors. Once that happens, we have our 6 months to then back into that 65%. And we can go to the next slide.
Before you proceed to that, we have a question from Senator Stedman.
Yeah, just a question to help me if there's clarity on the financing. There was interest through construction. So on this project, would there be construction loans and then long-term financing, or is it just one financial package that takes you through construction and then through, the 20-year life or 30-year life, whatever the terms are of the loan?
Yeah.
Can you help me with that, just so I understand the mechanism?
Yes, absolutely. Senator Stedman through the chair. If it's just a pure construction loan, you have to have sponsor guarantees for that in case of default. Because this is project finance, there is no pure construction loan. There is the loan that lasts through construction, but then has a tenor usually in line with your LNG sales contracts, or for the phase one, your in-state sales contracts. So 30-year loans. Now these, after you complete the project, these often get refinanced for lower rates. But when you first set them, you have to set them for the term of the revenue stream, because it's that revenue stream that the banks actually have recourse to, not to any parent company or sponsors' balance sheets.
Senator Stedman.
And then, so the construction period is 5 years, 3 years? What are we looking for this interest accumulation that we're going to have to deal with along with capital costs?
Yeah. Senator Stedman through the chair, for the pipeline, roughly 3 years of construction, and for the LNG plant GTP, more like 5 years of construction.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Further questions on slide number 24? Please proceed.
All right. So here's where we talk about how that back end works. So in this example, I've shown AGDC elects to exercise its full 25% ownership option. So the 65% that the other investors selected or was issued to the other investors, we can back into 25% of that. So that's 16.25% of the total ownership of the project that we'd have direct. We still have our 25% of the carried 35% interest, which is another 8.75. And you'll see that 16.25 and 8.75 add up to 25%. So in fact, what's been preserved is the right to always have 25% of the total project should we want to. The question is always just going to be how much of that has to be paid and how much of that ends up being carried. And of course, like I mentioned before, on the carried amount, we're perfectly aligned with Glen Farm to try and achieve the highest amount there.
So, Mr. Richards.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to add on to that, the key distinction we were trying to also reflect in this was that of the 65% equity that Glen Farm would raise, that would be direct ownership if we elected to take 25%. So that's direct ownership in the 8-Star pipeline. And then the retained interest in the 35% is an indirect ownership stake. So no more money required for that. So that's where the consideration is how much is Glen Farm going to be able to retain in ownership rights while they're going through this equity raise? In this example, we've identified 35%. It could be 25%. It could be 10%. It could be zero. So that's the issue that we've talked about in terms of the dilution. If Glen Farm is not able to have a retention and seeks outside investment to come in to be able to cover the cost of the project, then we would only have those developer economics that Matt talked about. That is, again, where we feel we're aligned, because we know that Glen Farm will want to have some retention of equity position as they raise capital for this. So if Glen Farm is able to do that, AGDC will have 25% of that ownership.
Questions?
Yeah, I call BS. Every single one of them's got a question. They just don't want to ask it. I'm ready to back it up and listen to it again. I'm not going to for the sake of recording here, but I guarantee you there's people sitting at that table that don't quite fully understand. All right. Okay, so you've got the 25% at the top that is going to exist regardless of whether we give more money. We don't have to give more money in order to have that 25% ownership. Glen Farm's got 75%. Underneath that, at the pipeline company level, we have the opportunity to put our capital forward and own an additional percentage of the project. So then our 25% goes up a little bit, so that, this is the thing, is in my mind, I'm thinking, as soon as I do that, then I'm opening myself up for cost overruns and having to fund that. Right. I'm like, I don't want to see public funds in that position. I would rather just maintain the current ownership structure and let the private industry fund and manage this other piece of it. That's just my opinion here at this point. Let's move forward.
Regarding the $15.5 billion required for the pipeline, is it crucial that all of that be secured before construction begins? I'm wondering if that is the case. Is that why you have the 160 days for Alaska to decide whether or not they want to participate?
Senator Hoffman, Chair Hoffman, you have to have all of that lined up at your final investment decision because you've lined up all that debt, and the lenders will require that you have all of that lined up at FID, enough to construct the project along with the contingency and even some additional contingency for cost overrun risk usually.
If I may,
Senator Kaufman?
Was there more?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Again, the key point was, as the debt and the equity must be determined prior to FID, it will not require AGDC or the state of Alaska to have made that equity decision at that time. That's where we've reserved the option to back in to 25% of the equity after FID.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, I got it. I understand.
To achieve FID, you'll need to have all your debt financing lined up. In this particular example, $10.85 billion of debt financing by the banks. You will also have to have raised equity capital, in this case, about $4.65 billion. Once that $15.5 billion is secured, you then have the financing available to take final investment decision. What AGDC has reserved for the state and Alaskans is the opportunity after FID to take up to 25% of the equity stake. And in this particular example, we used the range of 5%, or about 230 million, up to 25%, or about 1.16 billion.
So what it means is you're gonna go get the loans with all of your equity and your debt. And then after FID, the state has, I think they said 180 days to decide whether you're going to back in, and basically you push somebody else out and bring in your money instead of theirs. That's what I think I hear.
If I may,
Yes.
Matt Kissinger, for the record. During that 180 days, ideally, we will kick off construction and be moving. But it's potential that these other investors who have that have the potential to be preempted by us, that they're not going to want to expose themselves to too much risk during that 180-day period. And so it does behoove us to actually shorten that period.
Yeah, I would say. Can you imagine somebody says, I'm going to put hundreds of millions of dollars towards this project, knowing that the state of Alaska, this legislative group, could step in and bump me out of line? Yeah, make this up. I mean, that seems counterintuitive if you're looking to try to woo people into your project.
So I understand the issue of putting the financial package together before you get basically the building permit to go build a project. Can the state go in early in the initial raising of funds and say hypothetically we want to take 25% interest in 8-Star Pipeline before FID?
Senator
Have
Stedman,
to come in after the fact.
Senator Stedman, through the chair, we could attempt to invest at the same time as the other investors at FID. We could attempt to do that. The agreements provide for that to happen. But we've always thought it was a huge advantage for us to be able to have that 180-day preemptive right, to give us the assurance that the other investors are there, to see the quality of those investors, and to look at the information after they've looked at it.
Senator Stedman.
I would agree with that, by the way. I think that's a good structure to have come in after the fact, not before the fact.
Senator Stedman agrees with AGDC. Mark it on your calendar.
Further questions on slide number 24, Senator Kaufman.
Well, not specifically on slide 24. When we get to general questions, I have a few things that have collected in my hopper.
Nobody has asked about cost overruns yet. Is that because everybody understands? Or we haven't got that far yet?
Questions on slide 24, Senator Merrick.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hoffman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. How much of the 30% equity has been already raised?
Through the chair, Senator Merrick, right now there has not been an equity raise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Merrick. Senator Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kissinger, you said that we should expect, as we look at the price tag, to see a project contingency and perhaps an additional contingency for cost overruns. Can you give us a range of what those might be in percentage terms or dollar terms or whatever? I mean, obviously, you said the banker's going to set that, so you can't tell me what the number is, but spitball.
Senator Keel, through the chair, the one that we can give with some assurance or some certainty, there's still a huge range to it, but is the initial contingency would be roughly in line. We would expect it to be roughly in line with the accuracy of a Class 2 cost estimate, which would be plus 15%.
Senator Keel.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. I'll hold off.
Thank you, Senator Keel. Senator Stedman.
This is a reminder for those looking at the slide the other day on cost that they need to add that 15% onto those numerics to get a better range of what we're actually looking at, because they were not left off, or they were left off, and then, which is fine, as long because we know that they were left off. But then the cost overruns is in addition to that,
That's correct.
if there is cost overruns.
Further question on slide 24, Senator Keel.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Since I'm asking ignorant questions, I may as well keep going. In the ideal world, our cost estimates were great. Our contractors are phenomenal, and we don't need that that overrun allowance or maybe even the contingency allowance. But we did an equity raise for 30% of it. Presumably, what we borrowed, we can give back to the lender. What do you do with the cash you got from equity investors that you didn't need?
Senator Keel, through the chair, if you haven't used all of it, it can be dealt with in a number of ways. One is to retire debt early. The other one is to be remitted back to the equity investors. Oftentimes, this is given as a not tranches, but sort of different packs of commitment. Your primary pack to build the project, then your contingency pack, and then your cost overrun. And so these extra ones don't get tapped into until they're needed. So oftentimes they get retained by the equity investors if they're not utilized.
Senator Keel.
Thank you. So retained by the equity investors, I understand that you talked about using that money potentially to retire debt early. Does that changes the debt to equity ratio on the project in the end, right? So how does that impact tariff down the pipe?
Frank, you ask a good question. What does this have to do with the bill? Absolutely nothing. In as much as this doesn't have anything to do with a property tax abatement or a volumetric tax, right? It doesn't have anything to do with that. However, the legislature is going to have to make a decision on equity. And they're having a conversation now. They're wrapping their head around it. If that decision has to be made this year, then these are the people who are going to be making it. If that decision has to be made next year, these people may not be the same ones in the legislature making it. Although I'm just thinking out loud here on if any of those individuals are running for re-election and have opponents. Senator Stedman is up for re-election, but he doesn't have an opponent, to the best of my recollection. So point is, it's probably a good thing that these guys are they're getting introduced to this, and it gives them plenty of time to think. We should have had this conversation regarding tax a long time ago with the legislature. And for various reasons, which I don't fully understand, we haven't had that conversation yet. Obviously, these people need time to let an idea marinate in their brain so that they can understand and move forward. And it would have been better if the legislature had have taken this up at the beginning of the session or last year sometime. Could have called a special session last year to talk about property taxes. Anyway, maybe the timing wasn't right for Glenfarne. I don't know. I don't have visibility on that. But just speaking specifically about the legislature, it probably would have been better. Maybe we wouldn't have had to have the additional cost of a special session if this conversation had have started sooner. The tax conversation had have started sooner. So now that we're starting the equity conversation, at least now we can say that we've been thinking about it for a while before the decision actually has to be made. And that's not a bad thing, in my opinion. Why are the only two asking dumb questions from Southeast? Why are they only two asking questions from Southeast? Everybody else is like bumps on a log.
Senator Keel, through the chair, it shouldn't change your tariffs necessarily, but change your cost of supply for sure, because you end up with a higher cost of capital by doing that, which is why you probably wouldn't retire your debt early in an instance like a pipeline like that.
Senator Keel. Thank you. Senator Keel, further questions? Please continue.
I think that's...
Mr. Chairman, again, Frank Richards for the record. We talked about slide 25 and we went through it. So we are now at the end of our presentation.
Further questions that committee members may have at this time? Any questions that would come up later, please provide them to my staff, Pete Eklund, and we'll get them to AGDC for response. Senator Kaufman.
Thank you. Wondering if y'all have given any thought to, kind of the prerequisites in the civil sector. So anticipating a project like this, when planning, designing a concept as front-end loading, you're looking at everything that you need to know, and it goes back to prior discussions we had at the table about the stage gate process and all that. In your stage gates, do you have a strong consideration of what we might need to do in the civil sector to be ready for some of these things? The front-end loading of that, perhaps there's some infrastructure that is not up to grade for what we need to do. And so how that private sector, civil sector, how we link those and be sure that that front-end loading is in there so that we have consideration, considering the admittedly slow process of a legislature to get ready for things. We have to have that on our radar as well if we're looking at a capital budget, let's say, and how that may tie into what needs to happen.
Through the chair, Senator Kaufman, that's an excellent question, and one that we have been in consultation with Glen Farm considerably, because in a former life, I was out looking at the roads and the highways necessary to make sure that they were going to be in good enough condition for this project. And I will say that DOT over the intervening years has done an excellent job of taking on those responsibilities to make sure that the bridges that were weight restricted are now capable of handling the loads that we anticipate for this project, or the embankment or the pavements necessary to be able to assure that they're in good condition prior to the major infrastructure or transportation logistics that will be traversing over those. So I think that it will still be a negotiation between the state of Alaska and its infrastructure, and ultimately what will need to occur after the construction. But Glen Farm is committed to working with DOT to do that. They'll look at the infrastructure. They'll likely do an assessment of the condition of the infrastructure beforehand and then look at it afterwards. Secondarily, in looking at the needs of the civil, I'll call it civil service necessary to be able to assure that the state of Alaska has the resources necessary to administer the permitting necessary for this. That's been a key consideration of the governor's review and making sure that his departments are standing ready to be able to address the concerns as they come forward, specifically in the regulatory arena. My concern, though, looking at what this project will do in terms of labor, is that we will have a significant major project that will be offering wages to people to work on the project that will potentially impact the Department of Transportation's operations section. You've got trained operators and mechanics.
There you go, Frank.
That know the highway system and are capable of operating the.
Somebody's thinking about it.
But they're not going to be at the pay scale comparable to what the operators are going to be at during construction. So that may be an impact, and that's something I'm concerned about.
Who's going to plow Frank's
It
roads?
sounds like it's good time to learn how to drive a snowplow or a dump truck. The other question I had, and I think we have the commission coming in tomorrow. We're going to be talking about the supply of gas, and in the presentation today, you were mentioning sources of gas. I don't know. I think it was on slide 20, maybe.
Slide number.
Yes, under the developer scorecard. And I failed to ask that. So mention Pantheon, and I'm just wondering, has that, what's the status with AOG CC? How's all that working? I think you actually have two sources that have been approved by them, but there's more than those two here. So just so that we touch on it now, so that there's not something unanswered or left hanging tomorrow, I think it would be good to address.
Senator Kaufman, through the chair. Actually, there are three sources that have AOGCC offtake authorizations. There's Prudhoe Bay, Point Thompson, which we talk a lot about, but there's also North Star, actually, which we just sort of forget about sometimes, but there's quite a bit of gas that was already in the North Star Reservoir, and there's more gas that had been sent over to North Star from the Prudhoe Bay Reservoir during the operation of that field. When it comes to Great Bear Pantheon, there are several thresholds that still need to be met. They have to achieve a commerciality in their wells. Then they have to take that to an FID, which is going to require permitting. And ultimately, they'll have to form a pool and have pool rules established by the AOGCC. So until that happens, there is no firm offtake capability from Great Bear Pantheon. We do keep highlighting them because it is a tremendous amount of gas. We did due diligence on it using a firm called Ryder Scott. It's a well-known reservoir engineering firm. And they established that the gas is there and really just, again, this commerciality needs to be proved. But it's very good quality gas is why we like it, especially for phase one. To the extent that we can use it, it reduces our reliance on gas treatment on the North Slope so that we don't have to deal with a gas treatment plant to some degree or can build a smaller one.
Senator Kaufman.
Thank you. And I guess, will y'all be in the building or present tomorrow during any of the testimony?
Through the chair, Senator Kaufman, we'll be online tomorrow.
Okay, good. That'll be helpful. And I guess the one other thing that I had is back on the, I forget which slide, but it was with respect to federal, we were talking about the incentives that could help make the project happen. And you talk about state considerations like we're doing with the tax reform to get off of an onerous property tax to a tax that's more calibrated for a project like this. And just wondering what our standing is right now with the application process or the vetting by any federal entity that might be able to help through, I don't know, grants or loan guarantees or whatever that process. We keep going back, or at least I keep trying to go back to what's that scorecard and how are we doing? So how's that coming with the feds? Is there anything languishing there that needs to move along?
Through the chair, Senator Kaufman.
Restriction on that.
Excuse me.
There's a federal gag restriction.
Mr. Kissinger.
Yeah, Senator Kaufman through the chair. So the DOE does have restrictions on how much we can say about the process with Department of Energy. And so we often point to the Secretary of Energy and his remarks. But I think, we all heard Mr. Prestige in here yesterday mentioning that they're focusing very much on private debt, at least for phase one at this point in time.
Senator Kaufman.
Mr. Chairman, to address Senator Kaufman, Frank Richards for the record. Again, but there are conversations that Glen Farm is having across the administration in DC about opportunities where the administration is looking to be able to support the project. So those are ongoing, I would say, daily conversations. And again, as late as last week, when the secretaries were here in state, engaging and having face-to-face conversations.
Senator Kaufman.
So I just want to throw this out here. It is one of the questions that has been in my mind over the last couple of days as I listened to Adam Prestige, and actually started when I was listening to John Sims with Instar. John is the one that brought up that they're going to sign a contract, and the contract is $16 MCF. I think I got that right. $16 anyway. So subsequent slides later, presentations later, we learned that 320 MCF and 500 MCF are the numbers that they were using for throughput, and your $16 range was associated with 500 MCF throughput. So if it's not 500 MCF, if it's somewhere less than that, then it is a different number than 16. Okay. And this was on the slide that communicates 10% profit to Glen Farm. So maybe Glen Farm is accepting that we're coming off of the 10% profit if it isn't 500 MCF, which we're not at 500 MCF. There's not 500 MCF demand from South Central Alaska and Fairbanks, everything that's all in. Like that demand's not there right now. We're gonna have to grow it. That takes time. It takes projects, it takes time, it's not just gonna happen, right? So why is Instar? Well, Instar they could get their contract signed and they don't care what happens with the project. As long as the gas flows, they don't care. But Glenfarne is okay with that $16, and they're throwing that contract out that they're going to sign with NSTAR just about with as much surety as what NSTAR was throwing out. So it seems to be a sure thing that that's what they're going to do. Well, if they lock in $16 and that equates to the price range at 500 MCF, how do they come up with the additional MCF that doesn't exist? Is it that's what I don't understand. It doesn't appear to be a showstopper because they would be talking about it, I would think. Maybe it is a showstopper and they're just not being clear with us. But the throughput has got to match the dollar figure in my mind. Okay. So if it's not 500 MCF, it's 300 MCF, then your price is, somewhere north of 16. I think the slides were having it at 25 or 30. Okay. Which is significant. I mean, it's twice what we're paying now, which is not something that Alaskans are going to want to hear. You're not going to want to do that for 1 month, let alone 24 months or more. So the conversation that they just brought up with regard to Department of Energy, tying back to the recent executive orders by POTUS, one of the things that the executive order gave the Department of Energy was more latitude in signing contracts for purchases. So it makes me think in my mind that if Glenfarne is confident that they can get their 500 MCF throughput in some form or fashion, whether it is actual gas that's flowing or whether it's pre-sale on gas that will flow, as long as the contract says this is during this time period. Not sure how creative they can be, but if the Department of Energy has the authority to buy contracted gas, and they're able to say, we're going to buy a certain MCF of gas in order to reach that threshold that makes it economical, then maybe that's what is being planned here. And we just don't have any visibility. I certainly don't have any visibility on it, but this I think is a possibility. It would explain why there would be such assurance on being able to sign contracts, small contracts with HEA, MEA, GEA, GVA, NSTAR, all of our utilities for the maximum amount of gas that we can actually use and still think that we're going to get to the 500. The two are disconnected, and I don't understand why yet. But I think it's because they've got something else up their sleeve. We're just not privy to it yet. And if what we just heard from AGDC is that Department of Energy has said you will not talk about what we're considering, then we're not going to hear about it until it's announced, right? Or until it is no longer embargoed. Anyway, that seems to make sense to me, that if the Department of Energy is looking for a way that they can support the project, but they don't have the ability to just give the project capital, right? Debt, equity. Department of Energy is not going to be in that mix. So how could they help? Well, they can help on the purchasing end. They can be a customer and they just take possession of the gas down the calendar. So next year, 2 years from now, whenever the gas is flowing, then we'll take possession of the gas at the price that we paid and the quantity we paid years in advance. Just came to my mind that I think that might be something. But anyway, no skid off my back if I'm wrong. I do think that there is going to have to be a solution with regard to this throughput, or it's not that big of a deal. And if I'm understanding correctly, if $16 truly is what is going to make this economical, meaning it's not the $16 makes it economical, it's the fact that they've got purchase agreements for the volume that makes it economical. That's what the investor is going to want to see. You got entities that are going to sell the gas. You got entities that are going to buy the gas. We're not talking about export. We're talking about import. So who are those? If it's the federal government plus locals, then maybe that's bankable with the investors for the pipeline. I don't know. Seems logical to me. I lost my screen there.
Just wondering, as we're considering if there's a piece of the puzzle, at least in stasis right now or something, I hope we know, if we do legislation, just hope that we're informed enough about whatever that status might be so that we don't leave something out. And that goes back to kind of the general thread of the comments and questions that I've had, is that with AGDC's role in this and the legislature's role, it's important that we get anything in this legislation we're working on that may need to strengthen or add the sideboards that'll provide the protections on cost overruns, on cost of gas, on availability. And if there's some element of federal involvement that we're missing, that may be a key piece of that, and that may set a different floor for what we're doing. So I think to the extent that we can flesh that out and know what we're doing, I think what was Rumsfeld talked about, the unknowns and the known unknowns. I think we've got a little bit of that we're trying to sort through, especially when it comes to making sure we get the right language in the bill that ultimately I hope goes across the floor. And
none of this is required to be in the bill. This is like none your business right now. You need to focus on the tax. Like, this is frustrating. You don't need to know that the project is actually going to go forward in order to set a tax that is economical for the project to go forward. You don't need to know that. What is the harm in setting a tax for a project that may go forward and it may not go forward? What is the harm in setting it if it does not go forward? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You've wasted your time, okay, in a special session. That's it. The state's not out anything. You're not obligating the state to spend anything. If you put a tax in place and the project never goes forward and you don't get any tax revenue for it, there's no downside. So all of this questioning isn't pertinent to what tax rate do you need. That's the pertinent piece. What tax rate do you need? That's what you need to focus on, legislature. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, can you corral your forces here, your folks, and focus on the piece of legislation that's at hand? Address the tax rate, address the making the project economical. And then we can have conversations to our heart's content about these other things that are gee whiz, but they're not in the bill. You're not going to add them to the bill because it's none of your business. Just focus on the things that you need to focus on. To focus on what only you can do, which is address the tax situation.
Successfully enables the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kaufman. Further questions on Alaska Gasline Development Corporation's present?
Again, cost overruns. Frank, $16 is for a current cost, more gas, price drops. Yeah, that's exactly right. I was trying to get to the cost overruns. You're playing a game, Frank. You're having fun. I'm on this side and I'm being a good boy. The cost overruns is not an issue unless we answer the question with an affirmative. Are we going to be equity owners? As long as we're not equity owners, cost overruns is not a state's concern. It is the equity owner's concern. It is tangentially our concern because we want to see the pipeline happen. But if there are cost overruns and the pipeline doesn't get built, then there's a different problem. Somebody's going to have to fix it. Does that become the state? Not automatically. The state would have to choose to spend money to do it, to finish the pipeline. But anyway, I digress. It's a sequence of things that needs to happen, right? We can have the conversation about cost overruns, but Glenn Farn has been very clear. The contract, the bill, everything is set up so that the state is not going to be at risk for cost overruns. The only way that we are going to be at stake for cost overruns is if we choose to be equity investors. And that is a choice the legislature is going to have to make after they make a taxing decision. This decision sequence happens before that equity conversation, and it must happen. You don't get to the equity conversation. You don't get to put yourself at risk for cost overruns if you don't solve the tax situation first. That's the bill. That's the entire focus of this special session, and that's what they should remain focused on, not all of the other stuff of redoing project analysis and making sure that Glen Farm's doing the right thing. It's just, anyway, I think we're about done here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since my colleague across the table brought up the civil engineering side of things, can you talk to us a little bit about the alignment on fixing the Dalton? If memory serves, at one point this session, DOT said the Dalton Highway is a couple of $100 million shy of where it needs to be. 200, I don't remember. Is that something that is going to be state general fund match and federal highway dollars? Is there a contribution from the project? There's been discussion about the project helping to pay for some of this road work.
Mr. Richards.
Through the chair, Senator Keel, again, what DOT has in the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program, is a considerable amount of projects on the Dalton Highway. Those were planned and designed, again, to follow the federal program, the Federal Highway Administration Program, which would essentially use state match. What DOT and Glen Farm or the H-Star are in discussions are around the condition of the project, when those projects are actually going to be executed, namely because you have to look at the cadence of pipeline construction. So if you have a major highway project that's being constructed and you want pipe traveling through that project, then you're impacting the cadence of the pipeline construction. So whether or not those projects are deferred a year or so, that is still to be decided and determined. But also they talked about, again, as I said, the impacts of the construction on the highways and how to mitigate that or pay for that. So that's an ongoing discussion.
Well, I think, Frank, the answer is whoever's responsible for it right now. I know that there was another conversation in another bill in another session that we're talking about additional, adding into the bill the additional monies for maintenance of the Hall Road. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets added into this conversation as well, or into this bill as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I think Mr. Richards may recall from a past life, it's a federal national highway system roadway. Yes. And Uncle Sam has rules for doing work on those that would make the Byzantines blush. Do we have, when you talked earlier in your presentation about technical expertise and other assistance to Glen Farm, has anybody run them through what it takes to fix an NHS road?
Through the chair, Senator Keel, that's essentially been my role, to be able to talk to them about the standard levels of a federal highway system project. But let me give another example. The liquefaction facility in Nikiski is going to be placed just south of the existing Agrium facility. For those who haven't been there, the Kenai Spur Highway runs right to the east of those facilities. This plant is going to essentially sit on that Kenai Spur Highway existing alignment. So that alignment needs to change. Our work has came up with a preferred alternative for relocating that. That work for relocating it is designed to national highways or to the federal highway system standards, but the cost will be borne by the project. So Glen Farm is aware of the standards. They are aware of the what the state needs to do to be able to design, build, and then transfer a road to meet those national highway system, national standards, so that the state of Alaska will then have the opportunity to utilize federal funds on those roads in the future.
Senator Keel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If they're not using folks who've actually been through it before, I recommend they add 40%.
Further questions on the presentation, Senator Stedman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not so much on his presentation, but I talked to the presenters here before the meeting because there was a news announcement right before about 11 o'clock this morning dealing with the coal plant. The Trump administration's put $700 million down. Maybe a couple $100 million could end up in Alaska to pursue that. And the issue is, I guess the question is if we could have AGDC look at that to see if there's any, if it's all for the mine up to West Sioux because it's a coal-fired plant, or is there an opportunity there to plug the mine in with natural gas also, or are they going to generate extra electricity and ship it into the grid, just so we can get an idea of the impact that may or may not, facilitate the financing of the gas line project.
So my understanding here, and I'm looking at a press release from Representative McCabe that says that the Trump administration's announcement of approximately $89 million in federal grant funding for the Terra Energy Center project in West Susitna. I don't know whether that's the only money and project that's receiving federal money or attention right now. There might be others in the state. I'm unaware, but it appears that the dollar figure we're looking for is 89, and I don't know anything more than that. Of course, the project's going to have to be permitted, and if it's not already permitted, that's quite a while. The other thing that I know is that, well, at least I think I know, I've listened to people from Stage and others talk about the potential for economic development, and with regard to energy, their comments are, it needs to be an all of the above approach. The demand for energy is there. It is, you can't overbuild at this point. So, I'm not concerned that you would have a gas pipeline and a coal plant. I would say, hallelujah. Now we're going to have plenty of energy, more industry that comes in to consume that energy is going to lower the cost of electricity for Alaskans. And that is something that's about damn time.
Yes, Mr. Richards, can you look at that and submit something in writing to the committee?
Through the chair to Senator Stedman, yes, we would be happy to look at that. I wasn't aware of that announcement until the senator brought it to my attention right before this hearing. So we will dive in to see what that is all about.
Frank, you're asking a question about subsistence needs. Is someone going to deny access to subsistence needs or uses? I assume you mean those who are trying to do subsistence hunting or fishing along the corridor where the pipeline is going in, or other locations. Is that what you're asking? And then I would guess that either the project or state troopers would be the authority for that. Maybe if it's on federal land, it's the federal wildlife law enforcement. And I would guess that people are going to still have access to cross land, but they wouldn't necessarily be allowed to be hunting right where people are constructing pipelines. I mean, that only makes sense, but that's a temporary thing. It's not going to be for long, and maybe a hunter has to find a new location to hunt for a season. That's what my guess would be. You have got some really interesting questions tonight, Frank. Demand for energy override food security. Demand for energy. Does the pipeline override food security? No, and I think they're not mutually exclusive. If somebody needs food, there's more places to go get food than the pipeline corridor. You may have to travel more than you normally did for a season, but I don't understand why this has to be a conflict. Yes. Thank you, Hun. Nikiski has already felt the impact of this project, with a whole bunch of people selling their homes and their property in preparation for the project. And that's years ago, many years ago. The road is going to put a major crimp in our style here. Nikiski's got one road in and one road out, basically one paved road in and one paved road out. And rerouting is going to be an inconvenience while the construction's going. That's for sure. You're absolutely right. I have no idea living in an urban area. I have seen I have traveled and I have seen taps. So I have some idea what the size of the pipeline is, Frank. And I know that we're not talking about miles and miles of land that would need to be cleared of human habitation or subsistence hunting in order for the pipeline to get built. So this what I would term narrow corridor of people working, why would anybody want to hunt while there's a bunch of working going on anyway? Like, it would make sense to me that you would go away from where the urban activity is that's going on to build a pipeline and go hunt somewhere else. Nobody's going to stop building a pipeline because some hunter wants to go subsist and find a moose or whatever they're hunting. You're going to have to explain to me why this is a problem. Or I'm just not going to be able to answer your question. Let's put it that way. Maybe I just don't understand because I live in a semi-rural area and not rural Alaska. Okay. All right. I think, we're near the end of this broadcast here.
Are there questions on the presentation? Seeing none. Mr. Kissinger, do you have any closing comments?
Chair Hoffman, only that we support or we appreciate the deliberations and the conversation that we're having here. We hope that we've been able to provide the information that you need, and we're available for any further follow-up that is needed as we move through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kissinger. Mr. Richards, closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm recalling the numerous times that I've sat in front of this committee with both you and Senator Stedman as chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to come back and present and entertain the questions, always very thoughtful. I will say that what I heard us saying today, we use the collective term we, meaning Matt and I when we say we, but what we're referring to is AGDC's role as the state of Alaska's corporation. So it is our role and our mission to move this project in the best way forward for the best interest of the state of Alaska. So when you hear us say we, it's not the Matt and Frank team, it is AGDC as the state's corporation. And we take that mission very seriously. And the board is very serious that we make sure that we're complying with our statutes and meeting the missions that were granted to us. So we're very honored to hold this position. We feel that the project has taken a major leap forward in having a developer that has really done a significant amount of work in a very short period of time. So it was really just about a year ago that they kicked off their efforts, and they have moved forward very quickly. If you recall, our original goal was to bring in an investor and seek $150 million. Well, they've done that, and they've achieved in moving forward with this project through the feed, but also in the gas sales, looking at the debt financing options, et cetera. So I feel that we are positioned as a state to execute on a project that will help not only interior Alaskans, but South Central Alaskans, and ultimately through the Energy Relief Fund, all of Alaskans, the opportunity to utilize the commercialization of those what has been stranded North Slope assets. So I appreciate working with the committee. Again, as Matt indicated, we're happy to provide any more insights that we can, or work with the committee to be able to address what you feel is necessary to help us move this project forward.
There are members of that committee that wanted to fire Frank and close down AGDC a year or more ago. So this is, it's kind of interesting to hear him praising the committee because the relationships have been strained, to say the least. So there's one comment here that I wanted to highlight at the end. See, I don't remember which one of you made it, but it was very pertinent. Yeah, Craig. Thanks, Craig. Yesterday, the pipeline had no viability. Now it's how much can we invest and how soon can we do it? When you start talking about how much money is going to be involved and how you make money, you catch people's attention. You're like, really? How are we going to have ownership? How are we going to benefit? Anyway, we'll see. We'll see what happens. The whole equity conversation is something that happens later. We need to focus the legislature on answering the question about making the project economical, and that requires addressing the tax situation. So let's not distract ourselves with all of the other things that are nice to know, but not pertinent to the task at hand, which is figuring out what the tax rate needs to be and the tax regime. Anyway, the entire world is watching. The entire world is watching. Let's get this right. All right. Okay, guys. I think that's it for tonight. Thanks all for participating. Good questions. And thanks for being patient with me with my technical difficulties here. Have no idea what happened. And I'm looking at my PC that I built from the ground up, brand new, and it's been working just fine. And today it decided to have a nervous breakdown or something. I can't explain. It's working fine now. We'll see you later. Have a good night.